session. So Alex and Carissa, if you could please bring yourselves up. And I just want to say that this session is generously sponsored by our full day sponsor, Lockheed Martin, as well as Maxar and Teledyne Brown Engineering. So thank you to you guys for your support. We have a great discussion for you right now on space economy with two people that couldn't be better suited for the job. Carissa Christensen is the CEO and founder of Bryce Space and Technology, and Alex MacDonald is the chief economist at NASA in the Office of the Administrator. With that, Carissa, I turn it over to you. Unmute and have fun.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Always a delight to share the stage and talk about the space economy with Alex. We've done that on stage. We've done that in offices. We've done that in bars. It's a topic that's very important to both of us. What I'd like to do today is kick off with some overview framing slides to offer some data on the space economy to inform our discussion. My company, Bryce Space and Technology, one of our key capabilities, our key product areas is industry data, and this is widely shared, widely released data that I hope you find useful. First slide. So this is a chart that we've produced for years characterizing the space economy at a glance. And it's really a bit of a hybrid to identify and highlight the key elements of the space economy. The upper left shows that about a quarter of the space economy, as measured here, it consists of government budgets internationally focused on space and space activities. About half of that expenditure is the US, and more than half of that is for national defense and intelligence. So that gives us a sense of the importance of space globally and the different national players. The rest of the pie, the vast majority of that pie, is driven today by revenues from satellite products and services. There are a couple of very large $100 billion-ish markets, one around direct-to-home television, one around products and services related to navigation satellites. And that $100 billion, close to $100 billion, is really the chipsets in your phone and in other devices. And there are additional to this revenues downstream as companies use those products for various purposes. The slide also shows launch and satellite revenues, commercial launch and satellite manufacturing revenues, which are a relatively small proportion of the total. That makes sense. Those are enabling infrastructure, absolutely critical to everything that we do, not generating the kind of revenue that value-added services, for example, do. And then we see a small sliver that is commercial human spaceflight, and there will be additional slivers that will grow over time, looking at that will reflect, for example, increased on-orbit activities, R&D, and potentially even manufacturing, as we see more commercial activity in low Earth orbit in addition to satellites. So that's the broad framing that I think helps us think about this topic. And that's been the satellite, the mature satellite industry, internet backbone, television, historically long distance telephone. That mature satellite industry is fairly well established, in many ways fairly predictable, and with a very diverse and active customer base. So that's an industry that exists, that has grown, and that has reached a level of maturity. Let's go to the next slide. A fascinating phenomenon that we are seeing in the space economy is the emergence of a new kind of space investor that's driving new types of companies. And so this slide, and I have to give some credit to NASA, and in particular, Dr. MacDonald's office. This slide reflects the updated results of a study that we first did in 2015, when we were hearing about new kinds of investment in space, but didn't have good data on exactly how big that investment was, who was investing, and why they were investing. So NASA funded the first version of this study. We found it so useful that we at Bryce updated it each year and release it. And this study is showing investment in what we call startup space companies. And those are companies that have in their development had venture or angel investment as a key element of their growth. So it's not every company, these are companies that have gotten funding and announced that funding. You can see an extraordinary jump in 2015 in funding from super angel billionaires and venture capital firms that has continued to grow through 2020. And we've seen hundreds of companies and many, many new investors enter into space looking for not just advocacy-oriented outcomes, I believe in space, but looking for financial returns. Next slide. Those companies are in their developmental stages. They're initially deploying their systems. They're seeking their customer base. And then we have an area of growth that we're talking about a lot in the future, and that is the potential for space activities, for industrial activities, for business activities in low Earth orbit beyond the satellite economy. And this slide highlights the fact that there are multiple markets, that many of them continue to be driven by government exploration demand at this point in their evolution, that some are more mature than others. And generally speaking, these are emergent markets. There's a vision. There are companies that are beginning to enter this market. There's R&D activity. There's assessment activity, with the expectation that there will be a growing economy, and the time frame of that is still highly uncertain, and that will take some time. Space companies tend to be a little slower than companies in other sectors because they're capital intensive and they're technologically complex to get to that maturity point and generate returns. So that's the framing that I hope will support our conversation today. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to Alex.
Well, thanks, Carissa. That's excellent framing. You know, it's really been an amazing journey, actually, looking back to some of those numbers on early venture capital investment. When we did that study for the first time around, I remember in 2015 or so, there was that little small peak that you can barely see right now, which we were all very excited about. And now basically that's kind of data in the noise compared to the multi-billion-dollar investments we're seeing today. I mean, it's just such a transformation in the landscape. And looking at the history of the Startup Space Report actually just gives you a great snapshot of how much has transformed. Can I get my slides up there? Because what I'm going to do is really dig into really just the economic impact of that one part of the pie that Carissa's kind of circular graph showed. And that's the NASA investment. So as we know, NASA is a significant government agency. You know, these days over $20 billion a year in total appropriations and then expenditures. And, you know, there's always a question of, well, what's the economic impact of that expenditure? And there's lots of different ways to think about it. Excuse me. You can look at it in terms of kind of speculative estimates of the value of the R&D that's happening. Or you can look at the impact of inspiration and these kind of things. And in fact, Carissa's company actually had done a report kind of looking at some of those metrics called the socioeconomic impact kind of metrics that look at some of those. What we've done here, though, is what I would say is a much more conservative approach. And that is to just calculate the economic impact using a very standard federal government model known as the IMPLAN model. Now, the IMPLAN model, I know you're all just dying to know about it, was a macroeconomic input-output model and the classic kind of Leontief, you know, input-output model, you know, method that basically simply calculates the multiplier effect, effectively using a number of particular techniques of a given level of expenditure. And this was developed in the 1970s, actually, by the U.S. Forestry Service and FEMA, who were trying to communicate to some of their stakeholders the economic impact of their activities across the country. And this has become, at this point, pretty much the standard approach used by government agencies and regional and state level agencies to explain the impact that our activities have in the economy. Because as we all know, you know, having a job also means that you have income to give to other people, which then means that they can have a job, right? And this is kind of the velocity of money concept. This is the general Keynesian economic multiplier concept. And so the implant model these days is, I would say, the best-in-class one. We use it at the centers. The different centers that NASA has do fairly regular reports. Not all of them do, however. And what we had never done was done this at an agency level. We had never taken the years worth of procurement data from every single center in the agency, every single FTE, and done an implant model on that. And as we were looking to communicate to our stakeholders the value not just of NASA's activities overall, but specifically of our new Moon to Mars initiative, we wanted to do this report to just show that although we're all very excited about all the commercial activities, it's still these federal government expenditures through organizations like NASA that provide a critical underpinning to the economic health of this nation. And so briefly, this is how you calculate economic impact. You have your direct impact, which is simply your direct expenditures and your direct labor costs. So we break it out, of course, into procurement and labor including, of course, health and benefits. Important to note that basically about 85% of all of NASA's expenditures translates into procurement. So the health of NASA is ultimately the health of all the different industry players that support the agency, because the vast majority of all of NASA's appropriation go out to companies and universities and companies that are doing work for NASA. So adding up that expenditure plus the labor is your direct impact. Your indirect impact comes from essentially calculating the business-to-business transactions that happen once you've established these contracts. So interestingly enough, the implant model, which actually calculates every single type of transaction based on how it's codified in our procurement system, and I should back up a little bit and say that this required a huge amount of work at our centers, because they had to actually pull all the procurement data, be able to transmit it to the group that did this study, which is the University of Illinois at Chicago, and they basically take that input and then calculate the indirect impact based on the type of activity that it is. So, for example, aerospace production has a slightly higher multiplier than, for example, buying paper, simply because there are more suppliers that are required to conduct that activity, means that there are more indirect impacts. The model, I should say, just estimates this. We don't have actual indirect impact. We don't have induced. Those can only be estimated. So what we have actual is the direct. And then induced, as you can see with the little hand with the dollar bill, that is the one that we're all very familiar with. That is essentially people buying goods in their local economy. Johnny Stevenson, who helped organize this panel for us, actually, he worked very closely with myself and the team, and led the team at Marshall that really kind of put together this study. And he would often point out that he lives a little bit of a drive away from Huntsville, and as a result, his particular where he gets his pay stub would be encoded in the system, and then this would then basically calculate the indirect impact that he has in the local economy, which is just buying whatever Johnny buys down there in his local area. And so that's how we calculate this. And the University of Illinois Chicago did a great job of producing this report. If you're really interested, you could look online. I believe it's over 2,000 pages of basically estimates based on NASA's direct impact. And it's quite interesting. I'll give you just a couple highlights here before we get into questions. Can you go to the next slide? These are your bottom line, talking points, or your facts, or however you want to think about it when we think about the overall economic impact. NASA's FY19 direct impact, based on appropriations of around $22 billion, translates through additional indirect and induced effects to an overall nationwide economic output of $64.3 billion. This is not actually an unusual number, as has been pointed out by a number of folks who understand implant models. This isn't unexpected. This is actually what you'd expect for a technology R&D agency like NASA, and that's part of the point. This report is not trying to establish any really unusual impacts for NASA. It's really just saying that if you look at the type of activity, this is what you get. And in some respects, actually, that's very encouraging, because this means this is a bit of a conservative estimate. Right? This doesn't account for the value of the R&D. This doesn't account for the value of the inspiration. Doesn't account for the kind of knock-on effects in, for example, the venture capital community that NASA's programmatic activities might have by creating an overall bow wave of support for new activities. Right? This is just basically this overall calculation of economic output based on the direct impact. Over 312,000 jobs nationwide result from NASA's total activities. This is a really significant number. I mean, this means that really at the end of the day, NASA is a really fundamental foundation for a good part of the American economy. And then, of course, it also calculates the overall tax revenue. That's not just federal taxes, that's local taxes and state taxes that then basically get recouped back into government activities. As I said, this NASA level estimate was done for the whole agency, but we also really wanted to break out the moon to Mars impact. And of course, as I said, this is for FY19, which means that we expect this number to grow because we're specifically seeking increased appropriations, as I'm sure you're all aware, for FY20 and FY21 budgets. And in particular, that area of moon to Mars, based on FY21 submits, would actually be expected to double in the coming years. So, but it's important to note that already we have very significant economic impacts, $14 billion of economic output, already 70,000 jobs being supported from Moon to Mars activities. And that includes everything from SLS to Perseverance, which, as we know, is now already halfway to Mars. So it's a really encompassing kind of initiative that includes the different STMD, HEO, and SMD activities in one kind of account that the CFO group put together. Can we go next slide? This is your kind of top level information on some of the states that have the biggest economic impact. You can see FTE employment, which is your direct employment, and then total employment being the estimated amount. You know, Alabama, I know here at the VB Symposium, that's one of particular interest, an incredible amount of employment results from NASA activities, with $2.3 billion translating into over $6 billion there of total economic output. But also significant in places like Mississippi, right? Overall economic output over $500 million. And you've just got a lot of great examples here. And for the first time now, we can pull out this level of impact that's not just the result of one center's activities, but of the total agency level of activities. And thus far, this has been a really helpful tool in talking with the stakeholders, communicating to the public that there's real economic impact, you know, quote unquote, in your state, right, resulting from NASA activities. Go to the next chart. And this is the final chart I have here. This just shows the overall activity across the nation. And, you know, I think it's really important to note that this isn't just a set of, you know, 10 or so states that have significant economic activities. As you can see, there are major economic impacts in every state of the union. You know, as you can see from those numbers, I don't think you're looking at a single state that has less than, you know, over $1 million of overall economic impact. Some have significantly greater, of course. But, you know, there are important jobs in every state in the union, which is what you would hope for from a truly national aeronautics and space administration. And this data really shows that this is, you know, everything we do is the product of the nation, both in terms of the taxes that are required to conduct these activities, as well as, of course, the fact that there are returns to those expenditures to people across the country. And the purpose of this report was really to be able to kind of speak very clearly to that with real specific numbers. I'm really proud of the team that put this together. Again, it was a big lift, required people from every single center in the CFO's office to pull the data and work it with the group there at the University of Illinois Chicago. And I hope those of you who are participating today who also you know, talk to whether it's your stakeholders or your relatives, I hope that you find this a useful tool for communicating NASA's economic impact to the nation. So that's all I had on this one.
That is that's really interesting data. I'm kind of put in mind, Alex. I kind of talked about a trend in changes. You're talking about this, you know, the today moment in time of NASA's impacts. Mm-hmm. In kind of aligning that with NASA's establishment of the role of chief economist, and clearly NASA bringing some more focus and priority to that. So I think it'd be interesting for us to talk a little bit about how has NASA's kind of positioning and thinking and activity around economic activity, around commercial space, around working with industry and driving growth. How has that evolved in the time that you've been there? Because I think it's evolved a lot.
Yeah, well, thanks for the question, Chris, because I think it has too. And it's certainly been an interesting journey. I've been at NASA now for something on the order of 13 years. And, you know, certainly when I started, regularly one would get the question of why you would even have an economist at NASA. And I'll be honest, I actually get that question a lot less now. Still get it, but a lot less. And I think the reason is because what we've seen in the intervening time, right? Again, I joined in 2008, you know, under the VSE, right? Is we have transitioned to a world where the public understands that there is economic activity in space, that people have businesses, that there is competition between firms, right? I don't think I need to tell this audience that that's a significant feature of our current narrative landscape. But what's important, I think, is that that's now a really commonly understood thing within the public of our industry, right? And so what that means is that it's understood that we are an economy. I you know, when I started, I used to always like to joke that, you know, NASA's overall economic impact is equivalent to the entire GDP of Afghanistan or Bosnia-Herzegovina, which are nation states. So NASA always thought of itself, of course, as a very large entity, but what's changed, and you know, you're very familiar with this as well, Chris, is that there's now this real understanding that NASA engages with, can be shaped by this broader economic system that we're a part of, right? An economic system that doesn't just include other government agencies, it includes companies who are doing their own things for their own reasons. It includes high net worth individuals who have the capacity to make investments that, you know, maybe a market might not choose to do given a market's risk profile. And of course, when you're in a moment like we are now, where there's considerable interest from the markets in space, now there's a huge amount of potential for an organization like NASA to potentially leverage some of these market investments and maybe get to new capabilities earlier, cheaper than you might otherwise get to. So I would say that in the time that I've been at NASA, there really has been a shift to NASA thinking more in terms of, I wouldn't want to say economic development, but I would say thinking about its missions in the context of an economic system that produces these things overall, that it's not just up to NASA, right? And I would say that under the VSE, right, our Moon to Mars approach was very much that kind of approach, right? I think that's the best way you could see that shift, right? If you want to look at the strategic underpinnings of the VSE, right, it was essentially that NASA will go do this, right? Now, the strategic underpinnings of Artemis is that NASA is going to lead a alliance of entities, right, which includes commercial entities and international entities in developing a increasingly complex and increasingly active economic sphere that extends out to the moon. And for me, that's a critical shift, and it's a really encouraging one, and I think is going to make this one a much more robust effort, frankly, than what we saw in the past.
And it really sort of leverages NASA's expenditures in an interesting way. So if I say, here's the architecture and of my moon mission, here's the vehicle I'm going to use, and I'm going to hire people to develop that vehicle and implement that architecture. That certainly has an economic impact. It's certainly valuable. We've seen the value of that. The current approach of saying, we're going to execute a moon mission. We want to buy samples. We want to hear ideas about what the architecture should be. We want to have a little bit of a fly-off among competitors around certain capabilities. We are aware that at some point there will be a commercial economy for which NASA is not the end payer. It may be, you know, a decade, 2 decades away, but we're going to think about how we engage with that in mind. And it really just, it works with industry, it leverages industry in an entirely different way. It's been fascinating to see. Well, and the announcement, and I know you had a lot to do with this, just the announcement, speaking to low Earth orbit, of NASA's intent at the announcement at the stock market, at the stock exchange a couple of years ago.
The NASDAQ one, yeah.
That was so powerful. And it wasn't a major write a check. It was, again, leverage that innovative thinking about how to work with industry. Do you want to kind of remind everybody what that was? Because I really thought that was very important.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. I'll riff on that a little bit, and then I'm going to throw one back to you because I want to kind of also flip it a little bit there and talk about what you've seen change in the market sector in the last 12 years. Because I think there's been a lot there too, and also frankly out in the world of of kind of advising people on all this stuff, which has happily been a growth market in itself.
Yeah.
And so, on the Leo economy piece, I do think that NASDAQ moment was actually quite an important one, because it laid out a number of different pieces, and everyone's got their favorite, right? Some people are most excited about the private astronaut missions, right? That we announced we're prepared to accept up to 2 a year. Right. Some people were more excited about the willingness now for NASA to engage in just commercial use policies, right? The ability now for people to take a picture of a product in space, right? In the long run, NASA doesn't think it wants to be in the business of doing that, but we believe that companies are going to want to be doing that. And so right now we're prepared to kind of support those activities to prove that there may be a market for that, right? Other people are most excited about the willingness to add an additional module to the ISS through the use of the Node 2 forward port, which of course now we have made an award for. Other people were most excited about, the willingness to then also set up a competition for free flyers, right? Which we're now still looking forward to and looking to see here in the not too far distant future. Personally, as an economist, I was most excited about the commitment to a continuous U.S. presence in low Earth orbit, and then the release at that NASDAQ moment of NASA's demand for activities in low Earth orbit. Because what that tells you is something really important that I still think we haven't fully kind of appreciated since we live in this moment, but I think historians might look back on this and kind of think it was a similar moment to when Nixon made the space shuttle decision. If I can riff for just a second, Nixon, when he approved the space shuttle, was not overly enamored with it. In fact, he told the deputy administrator of NASA at the time, he said, even if human spaceflight wasn't a good economic investment, people are now flying in space and we'd best be part of it. And thereby authorized a new vehicle that will provide continuous access to low Earth orbit, which it, of course, marvelously did for many decades. Recently, we submitted a report 2 years ago now to the National Space Council. That was a co-developed report from the State Department, Department of Commerce, and NASA. That talked about the long-run strategy for human spaceflight in low Earth orbit. And the first kind of major recommendation conclusion of that was that we need to have a continuous U.S. human presence, whether astronaut or citizen, in low Earth orbit indefinitely. That is a really important statement from a federal government to say that it is in the interest of the nation to always have a human in low Earth orbit. For me, that NASDAQ moment was really all about laying the foundation, articulating the mechanisms by which NASA would work to that goal, right? Just stating it as a goal doesn't mean we get it. But it is this really important statement, I think, that we're really about here to celebrate 20 years of continuous human presence in low Earth orbit. I like to kind of say with a smile that that's exciting for a lot of different reasons, but one of them is because it means we're almost halfway to 50 years of continuous human presence in low Earth orbit, and that's the goal of ours, right? That we intend to have that length of continuous presence, and that underpins an economy, right? That creates an economy in Leo by having that level of commitment. So, I think that we're seeing a lot of activity in low Earth orbit. Obviously, the National Lab is a critical part of finding new applications for that. But I do think that that's one of the most important things that we've managed to kind of reestablish, which is that commitment. So I do want to, I see we got one question kind of coming in here. And it's about, we got one on, I guess we're going to call on Jim here to ask us it. And then I'm going to ask one to Carissa after it.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Alex. This question just came in. So what are the greatest commercial opportunities beyond Earth orbit? What's ripe for investment out there, and how, how near term are those opportunities?
So this is an excellent question. When you think about beyond low Earth orbit and beyond satellites, really you think about lunar activities, you think about even more long-term opportunities associated with using in-space resources to support exploration, and make it more economical. There are kind of two really big factors here. One is scale. So we're starting out with Beyond LEO as that's really exploration driven, and exploration is really largely government funded, not absolutely entirely. And as we've talked about, the vision for exploration involves a broader stakeholder community shaping it. It is largely government funded. So the sort of the first question is, what level of exploration are you doing? If you're doing a flight or 2 flights a year, it doesn't make sense to build factories in space of various kinds to support that. If you're conducting exploration activities at a much higher level, then it may make sense to, instead of bringing your fuel with you, to produce fuel in space. So as that exploration profile grows, there will be opportunities for businesses to support exploration in different ways. Those different ways will create capabilities that may have commercial implications. If I am producing fuel in orbit, that's then may enable an additional activity to the largely government funded exploration activity. Maybe there are new governments that become involved. Maybe there are visionary billionaires that become involved. Maybe there are companies, with very long-term visions that become involved to expand their mining business. So I think there's a hunger for, here's the market where we can do X in space and we'll make an awful lot of money from that commercially. And the further you get beyond LEO, the further away that is. I think the key point is, one, the way that NASA and other government agencies are approaching exploration facilitates that more. And two, there are business opportunities in being part of that ecosystem in the near term because of the way NASA is approaching it. If that, you want to add anything?
Yeah. No, I think I'll build on that last point. I mean, I think that there's a useful analogy for thinking about how we've been, seeing companies building off of businesses in LEO based on the ISS, for example, and thinking about that in the context of the moon as well. So because we had the ISS, right, we had a kind of a core set of demand that that allowed companies to then innovate within that ecosystem, right? Companies that use the ISS for things that were unexpected, things like CubeSat launch. Companies that have been using the ISS to develop new types of biomanufacturing, right? These types of things. I think there's something that can be similarly done. We're much earlier stages in it right now, of course, but looking at what NASA has talked about publicly about what it's really doing in terms of a kind of sustainable presence on the lunar surface. And, our plans on that are constantly evolving, but I would really encourage anyone who hasn't really deeply read the NASA plan on sustainable lunar exploration and development to take a good close look at that. Because the concept of Artemis Base Camp that we have articulated is, I think, a really exciting new approach to talking about a sustainable lunar presence that I think anyone who's interested in businesses should take a look at and think about what would you do with that type of presence, right? Because it's very different than a kind of undefined moon base. It isn't the kind of, we're not all the way to a lunar city yet, right? And nor are we relying on, Wayland-Yutani level mining corporations either, for all of you alien fans. But what we are saying is that in order to prepare for our exploration activities of returning to the moon and going on to Mars, we know that there's a minimum level of sustainable presence that we need in order to operationally become prepared for continued deeper exploration out into the solar system. And that includes essentially the elements of Artemis Base Camp. We know we're at least going to need a type of pressurized rover in order to explore the lunar surface in the type of way that we think we're going to want to explore the Martian surface. We know that we're going to need a type of habitation capability on the Gateway that allows us to test out the types of long duration systems and operations that we know we're going to do on the way to Mars. You know, we're going to want a kind of a lunar terrain vehicle capability, commensurate with what we've had with on the latter part of the Apollo missions. And we know that we're going to want a type of static presence to kind of anchor a presence, the base camp itself, right? A kind of foundation surface habitat module as well. And we know that we're going to want to at least be able to be there for a month or two, right? In order to test the type of duration that we might expect for a short stay on the Martian surface, which is currently what we're looking at doing. If you take all that together and you're a person looking at business opportunities, my take is that we're going to need that kind of level of minimum sustainable presence regardless of any plan that we're going to be having for the future exploration of the solar system. So rather than trying to build off the most extensive version of what we think we might want, let's build off of the minimum sustainable presence, base business plans around that, and think about how a company would participate in that ecosystem. For me, that's where I think the real opportunity is. Jim, I know you had another question here, but yeah.
Yeah, Jim, maybe you could come on and ask the questions since we're running short on time. Ask the questions and we'll answer them kind of headline style. We'll do the lightning round.
Cool. Yeah,
right.
That's a great way to go. So sure. So this first one, how do you assess the estimates by companies like Morgan Stanley or B of A, which seem to see a dramatic market growth, you know, over 10%, despite historic lower returns? Are they just goosing VC, or, you know, do they have some motives here? What do you think?
So historically, the growth of that space economy chart has been in the 5-6% range. So 10% is not crazy. You need a couple of big markets. So in order to evaluate those, you have to ask, what are the specific big markets, $100 billion markets they're predicting, and are they realistic? And happy to have a longer offline conversation about that.
Yeah, my headline answer is look up some of the multiple times Carissa has answered the same question in another forum. She's the expert on either debunking or supporting various bank financial projections on space economy stuff.
Yeah. So another question: what sector of the LEO economy do you think has the greatest potential for growth right now?
Super interesting. Alex, do you want to give your thought on that? Or
yeah, I would. Well, I'll do a quick one. I would say I think there's a lot of potential for growth, obviously, in private astronaut missions, and I think there will. In the not too distant future, let's say the decade timeframe, you know, at some point we're going to need to think about genuinely what kind of platform we're going to have in LEO that either evolved from the ISS or is at some point separate from the ISS. As we've stated, we are now getting to the point where there is a national objective of having a continuous human U.S. presence in low Earth orbit. So that tells you to achieve that objective, we're going to have some sort of new capability to maintain that continuous presence. And at some point, that's going to be a growth area as well.
I would agree. Private astronauts, to include astronauts from countries that are not currently active launching states, as well as private individuals. There's a good deal of interest there. Also, we're going to see growth in the use of the ISS as a platform for R&D. That's gentle but really important growth. And then at some point, we'll see a leg in the curve when there is a breakthrough that to produce a product that's either viable for consumption on orbit or consumption on Earth. That breakthrough moment, that's very difficult to predict. But the growth in R&D activity, I think we're going to see consistently.
Yeah, and one more on that. I think growth in other government users. We've seen significant growth from the NSF and the NIH, who are starting to really ramp up their own programs to use the ISS.
Gotcha. Okay, and then another quick one. Just you know, when you were talking about induced impact, what effects short-term and longer term is the COVID-19 pandemic having? Is that hitting the induced impact, and will that change this modeling in the future?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I'd be interested in Carissa's thoughts because I know she monitors this kind of change globally as well. It should change the calculation based essentially on individuals' expenditure rates, right? So that multiplier effect does rely on people taking the money that they get and then spending it on things. When the savings rate goes up, then your purchasing rate, of course, is usually commensurately going down. So I haven't looked deeply into that. I expect the implant model folks will be updating that. So yeah, you'd have to talk to a real implant expert on that one.
Have to talk to Johnny Stevenson.
Right.
Well, there you go.
What's he buying on his drive home? Speaking to the satellite industry, which does drive a lot of the revenues associated with the global space economy, a mixed bag of impacts, reductions in certain markets around maritime activity and travel, increases in demand for broadband. Satellite manufacturing and launch are generally continuing with very little disruption, partly because of adaptations. You can go to 3 shifts in a factory with fewer people and manage risks that way, and also because of existing inventory. So in terms of the supply chain and the manufacturing side, activities continuing pretty robustly.
Gotcha.
And also some credit to NASA. Bryce works with NASA. Many of us work with NASA. NASA has for years practiced telework very diligently and seriously. And the transition, to me, my experience of it has been shockingly smooth. So I really think that's worth recognizing, because it's been so well managed. No one ever talks about it, but NASA continues to operate fully in this environment. That's extraordinary.
Yeah. So we're out of time, but 20-second answer from each of you. It's just one of my favorite things. Carissa, you first. What's keeping you up at night?
We're on a great path. Continuity is key to success in long-term space ventures. So I'm looking for continuity for the path that we're on.
Alex?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would say increasingly thinking about, how we're going to be using space systems to actually address climate change keeps me up these days. We've got a lot of issues related to that, and I'm not sure that we've really fully taken a look at actually what we're going to need to do to get to net zero in various areas. Because I think if any organization or community should be thinking about the long run trajectory of planetary development, it should be the space community, and I'm not sure that we're really fully engaging with that level of challenge yet.
Gotcha. Well, excellent. Hey, thank you to both of you so much. And, sorry we're out of time. It was a great discussion. Wish we could go on, but it was great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you to everybody for your questions. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks all.
Okay.
Take care out there.